Hi, hello, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to another episode of March 8's Roundtable series. Whether you're joining us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, thanks for tuning in today. So, our Roundtable series is a series where we aim to raise awareness, provide knowledge, and start the conversation around women issues. So, as you can see from the title, today's topic is Trailblazers. Women in male-dominated industries. So a super kind of like hot topic that we're excited to talk about today. I am standing up, so sorry if I'm moving around a lot. It just felt like the right thing for this sort of discussion. There will be no comedy, but but there will be some good conversation and hopefully good insights. We have a guest joining us later on as well. So please join us for the next 30 minutes where we discuss exactly why there are so few women in certain industries, how we can encourage and support women to enter male-dominated industries, which do tend to be the big four STEM industries. And also we'll be talking about what the obstacles are that women actually have to face that are preventing some industries being accessible to them, whether that's funding or education. So today we aim for this to be an educational and positive session. So please feel free to write comments in the chat, let us know where you're tuning in from, and share your opinion. This is all about starting that conversation. So please engage with that. And obviously, if we see you commenting, we'll be sure to give you a shout out and read them out during the show as well today. So before we begin, I feel like I'm going to be saying the word industries a lot. So like apologies in advance. Before we begin today, as always, we actually have a poll that we'd like our audience to engage with. We posted it a few days ago, but we want to see everyone now tune in and make sure they give it a vote. So I'm going to comment it in the chat. Hopefully everyone can see that. The poll is, what is the biggest obstacles women face when wanting to progress their careers in male-dominated industries? You can see it on the slider down here. So option A, sexism or discrimination. B, lack of flexible support. C, lack of opportunities. Or D, the gender pay gap. So go share your comments, ideas in the chat. Hello, joining from South Africa. Thank you for joining us. And let's jump in. So as always, I'm joined by my lovely co-host and incredible editor of March 8 magazine, Lucy. So she's going to join the stage with us now.
Hi, Emily.
Hello, how are you doing?
Great, thanks. How are you? Great to be back on LinkedIn Live. It's been a little while, hasn't it?
It really has. It's been a hot minute. Hello, Kelly, for joining us. Thank you. Super excited for this discussion today. But let's kind of preface this with exactly why we're kind of bringing this up. It is related to a magazine feature that we did. So Lucy, why don't you tell us a little bit more about that from the November edition of March 8 magazine?
Of course. So for the November edition, we looked at 3 trailblazing industries and 3 women that are trailblazing certain industries. So we looked at, as you mentioned, tech from STEM, we looked at aviation, and we also looked at construction. So we had an amazing lady called Michelle Curran, also who goes by the name of Mace, who was a former Thunderbird pilot, that was a mouthful, sorry, and a combat veteran of the US Air Force. Rachel Moran was the co-chair of the National Association of Women in Construction in the Yorkshire region, and she's also a quantity surveyor. And Anna Brailsford, who is the CEO of Code First Girls. So we spoke to those 3 women, and they gave us an insight of all the challenges they have faced through their industries, as well as how they overcome that, and also the advice that they can pass on to the next generation as well. So through the feature, we just really looked at the various different challenges they faced, and also why we also need more women to kind of follow in their footsteps and to just carry on going and to break through to these industries.
Definitely. And I'm actually now going to drop the link in the chat for everyone to go check out our latest magazine and the rest of them. There is 7 wonderful magazines for you to go check out, feel inspired, and hopefully learn more about some women-based issues. Before we jump into the full kind of breadth of the conversation today, we are just going to show you a video that is related to the piece that Lucy was just talking about. So the Thunderbird pilot, Michelle Mace Curran, like Lucy said, former USA Thunderbird, an only woman to be a Thunderbird at the time. Lucy got the chance to speak with her and produce an incredible video that you're going to hear from me. It literally brings a tear to my eye. We're going to go ahead and play that video now, and we'll catch you after the break.
My name is Michelle Curran. I also go by Mace. I was a fighter pilot, and that's my call sign. The last 3 years of my career, I was a solo pilot for the Air Force Thunderbirds, flying air shows all across the country.
Michelle Curran of the United States Air Force Thunderbirds.
It's not often you get to meet a true military pioneer.
Did not plan on becoming a pilot, but I did need a way to pay for school, and so I ended up applying for an Air Force scholarship through ROTC. I went with the Air Force unit that I was part of to actually my first base and saw fighter aircraft fly for the first time, and I was blown away. I saw 2 jets take off in formation in full afterburner, and it was at dusk, so you could see the orange flame shooting out the back, and the jet noise just vibrated my whole body. I got goosebumps. That was a pivotal moment. I was one of 2 women in a squadron of 45, so nearly 50 pilots, and I felt like I had to prove myself. And then when I ended up on the Thunderbirds, I was the only woman flying for the team, and I was the 4th woman to fly in the demonstration in almost 70 years. The thing that influenced what I did next after the military was having those moments where I could truly see that I was leaving a positive impact on other people. And the most meaningful ones were mostly with girls or young women, when I could see that conversation was opening their eyes to what was possible for them in the world.
In 2 days, you're going to come to work with me, and you're going to be a Thunderbird for a day.
And to be able to do that for someone was by far the most rewarding thing, and I felt so lucky to be in a position where I could do that.
Thank you. Oh my God.
Absolutely. You can be
All right, so welcome back, everyone. That video literally makes me like giddy with like, I don't know what it is. There's just something really awesome about seeing some badass women helping out the younger generation. Like you could just see it there.
You can kind of feel her adrenaline, can't you? It's like it's contagious of how much she loves it and how just great she is. So
I know it's awesome, honestly. So that's kind of some of the content that we produce, videos alongside our articles. So be sure to go check out our magazine. It's time for us to kind of jump in head first into this conversation. I want to start off by adding some context about today's discussion and topic, and kind of just offering some stats just to make it feel a little bit more maybe digestible for those who aren't working in male-dominated industries. So there are dozens, so many number of industries, and so many that are predominantly dominated by women. So there are nursing, administration, teaching, clerking, for example. But in this day and age, we're kind of fighting for women to have more domination in the industries that have mostly been for men. So they tend to be the STEM industries, finance, etc. And so here's a stat. Women may account for approximately 32.9% of roles in large-scale tech firms, yet only 25% of those are technical roles. 71% of women report working in a tech company with a strong bro culture, while 50% share that they've actually faced gender inequality, discrimination, or sexual harassment in the workplace. So these are stats that clearly do not show progression or appreciation towards women or the tech industry. So today we're going to be breaking down why these statistics are the way they are, not just in tech, obviously, but across male-dominated industries as a whole. So it is with my pleasure to introduce our guest today. So please welcome to the virtual stage Flavia Richardson, Chief Commercial Officer at Velocity Juice, which is a scale-up funding solution for SMEs.
Hi, Flavia.
Hi, Emily. Hi, Lucy. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you.
Yeah, no, of course. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to chuck it over to Lucy. She's going to kick off the conversation. And then, like I said, we're going to jump in head first.
Yeah, but before we start, I just want to go Thunderbirds. Really great video. I was impressed.
It's very cool.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Well, thank you again for joining us, Flavia. And just to start the conversation, could you just begin by briefly introducing yourself, who you are, what you do, that kind of thing?
Amazing. Well, I will make it very simple. I've started my professional life qualifying as a solicitor here in the UK. And then I worked for 7.5 years with 3 funds on the venture capital side, investing, working on the portfolio management of a venture capital fund. I had quite a lot of touch points with companies in the tech world. I think across the 3 portfolios, I had over 160 companies from very large organizations now like Curve, all the way to consumer solutions like Thriva, Urban, Thread, and a few others that we might actually use. And then right to very deep tech solutions like MemGraph and Kraken, and a few in the sort of medical devices. And afterwards, I went to Silicon Valley Bank working on the health tech early stage practice, building portfolios for between kind of seed and Series A and B, so companies as they are kind of scaling. And now within Velocity Group, my role is to take to the market a new finance product that we have. Again, to companies that are very fast growing within the consumer space.
It sounds like you've been busy and you've had a great amount of experience in the last few
Yeah, I
years.
haven't slept much for a decade.
Well, I guess your lucky Christmas is coming up, so hopefully you can have a really long break then.
Amazing.
Could you just tell us about a few of the obstacles that you have faced along that journey?
Oh my, I think that I'm gonna go back to the very beginning. As I was coming into this ecosystem in my kind of early 20s, one of the things that was really difficult was the complete lack of support and groups of women, especially on the sort of leadership track. One of the things that is unique about venture capital and maybe private capital space is that the funds are usually very small. So I've always been in very small teams, but for Silicon Valley Bank, where I was almost in most cases the only woman or one of the very few. So it meant that from the start, I never really had the support and the mentorship, and that was one of the elements that I always had to work outside my engagements. And even within the ecosystem, over a decade ago, there were not that many women, and it's very rare that you can find someone that you can relate to that is able to tell you the things that are coming down the track 2-3 years and how to prepare yourself, because I think any profession has a learning curve. You can accumulate quite a lot very early on in a record amount of time, but then as you start to progress, it gets more and more faceted, the learning journey. And it often helps to have that guidance, that sounding board. For me, that was perhaps one of the most difficult elements, that in my 20s, I really didn't have it. And that is what I always sought to have. That is one of the reasons now I mentor in so many programs, and from Monday to Sunday, I will take time for founders, especially underrepresented group, to spend time and give them the things that I never really had as I was getting started professionally.
Yeah, I love that. And like, I think that's what's really incredible about women, is that they do pass on their knowledge, and they do like build these support groups, and now they try and start these conversations. Hence why we have that, you know, March 8 as a community, is because they're very sharing, because they have the same sort of, they've been through the same struggles, right? So I think that's incredible, and like, hats off to you for taking your time to pass your knowledge and insights to a whole new generation of girls.
I think that it's a very lonely journey. If you find yourself in the 10-20%, and in some cases single percentage of the organization that is in that role, or in within that responsibility, I think that it can be very isolating. We often relate to our male colleagues, and I know that many of us have great relationships, but they don't necessarily follow the same pathway in some situations. I mean, when it comes to parenting nowadays, the expectation is that we adopt the role, and how do we deal with that if you're in a very small organization, or the sort of general kind of life for women tends to have a little bit more kind of ups and downs. And I think that is where it gets really tricky to kind of blend professional expectations and the pressure of having to deliver very difficult things with maybe how men would adopt it. And I think that makes it a little bit more tricky.
Yeah. And I think, kind of following on from that, kind of the poll that we did and sent out to our audience was about, you know, what is the biggest obstacles that women face in the workplace? And currently the one that's leading is lack of flexible support. So you kind of spoke about lack of support, but in terms of flexibility, you know, like you mentioned, women lead a very different life when it comes to parenthood. So, you know, what do you make of this? Do you agree that this is probably the number one issue that needs to be kind of like pinned down?
Yeah, well, flexibility, you know, since lockdown, I mean, COVID has brought us a good element in our lives, and that was working from home, and actually proving to the highest levels in any organization that we can do this. We can be very efficient by being 2-3 days at home, in some cases being remote most of the time. So I think that was one good element. But for vast majority of my professional life, I was in the office from early in the morning until sometimes very late at night. And it meant that there was no way I could have done that outside those kind of guardrails that was set for me. At least in my 20s, I was working very long hours, sometimes trickling into the weekend. It would have been impossible to, let's say, take the decision to have a family. I couldn't have blended it over in any meaningful format.
And on the topic of flexible working, are there any key areas of flexible working that you think are particularly important? For example, like working from home, flexible hours, or maybe like job sharing or things like that. Is there anything that you think is like, well, that's
I actually think that all of the above, everything that is in the toolkit, is very relevant at different points. And I think it really depends on the role and the job and the organization. So if you could potentially do the work from home, flexibility, you being able to work from your home office or wherever you want to be, I think that it should be something that many employers should consider, because it means that when you are working, you are not worried about some of the other elements that might not necessarily it might not necessarily be very easy to manage when you're in the office, especially like many of us commuting into London or major cities. You might sit on in a suburb or just outside. But even taking the sort of responsibilities aside, if the job can genuinely be done from a remote location, I think it's in the interest of the employer. It makes you happier to have that flexibility as an employee, and it gives you an ability to be so much more engaged with the work that you do, because you can do it in your terms. So from my perspective, the past few years since I've been able to work some of the time at home, it's been really a blessing, because I'm able to coordinate all the other things in my life, and I'm much more happier with the work that I do. I'm not working less. Actually, I think that in terms of hours that I allocate, I probably allocate more to work. But the fact that I can rush out and do some things that I wouldn't be able to from our office in Soho, it really does give me a degree of happiness that I've never been able to experience. And I know it sounds crazy for the audience listening in, but I think it's those little things that it gives you that ability to say, you know what, this is a place where I want to be. It really works with me. I think we often, when we think about flexible working and this kind of conditions and being able to, I don't know, start an hour earlier, or maybe have a flexibility, a gap in the middle, and then continue later on after we pick up our kids, or maybe we do something that we had planned, or maybe we have a doctor appointment. I think we kind of created this culture of nomads and this kind of glitz Bali experience, which, let's face it, flexibility is what most of us need at some point in our lives. We need it. It's not about the nomad, exotic, destination, working on a beach. I mean, that is not what I would make of it. And I think in the technology space, that is what we kind of transition to believe flexibility is.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think I'm a massive advocate for flexible working and everything that's in that remit, because a lot of the things that I do online is I kind of read the research and look at various different reports, and I see that, you know, the correlation between productivity and employee happiness with flexible working. So I
Yes.
completely agree, and I think it's, if you are lucky enough to have a job and an employer that allows you to work from home, then I feel like that's definitely the way forward.
Yeah.
And then you've also got other things that are coming in, like the 4-day work week. So like you said, I do think that COVID obviously had a lot of pitfalls, and it was obviously a really awful period of time, but it has had its benefits from the working from it for the employee sense of things.
Lucy, one of the things I would want to say is that potentially is, you know, there are some professions where you can't have that flexibility.
Absolutely,
I mean, probably your car can't get repaired if the technician sits at home. There's so many high-tech jobs and engineering jobs that, and of course within the medical sector, that they absolutely have to be there in the hospital. The consultant can't just dial in your surgery, at least not at this stage. We might need another 20-30 years of robotics potentially one day. So I mean that there are professions where naturally you have to be on site, but there are vast majority in our economy, especially within technology, finance, where you have the luxury of being able to do the same thing from home in a very secure way.
Absolutely, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And just kind of going back to the male-dominated side of things, why do you still think that women are a minority in most industries, and particularly in the finance industry for yourself?
Well, it's not what I think. I think it's fact, right? So, irrespective of what I think, the situation is what it is. Decision makers in various different domains, from banking all the way to private equity to venture capital, all the way to kind of mutual fund and the way in which and hedge funds. So never mind just my little corner and where I operate, but more broadly, I think that there's been kind of at least 3-4 decades of data being very consistent. I think it really starts on the sort of educational track. Vast majority of young girls pre-university, I'm going to say young girls rather than women, because many of at that point you probably are still a child. They don't necessarily consider finance or investment or accounting or any of the professions within the finance realm. Many of them don't actually realize that they're different professions within the finance that are a little bit different, so not necessarily related to numbers. I mean, banks have marketing departments, operational departments, funds have the same. And I think that there's much earlier in the journey on the educational track quite a substantial gap. So what we find that girls are channeled in potentially less complex, less pressurized environments, mainly because the career centers and the guidance that is in schools nowadays is potentially deficient. They might be working on a completely different track compared to reality. And because they're not picking the right subjects, the right degrees, they're not maybe even considering some of the subjects. What happens is that you're so remote from the industry that it's going to be very difficult to make the transition. Although I am aware that vast majority of large organizations from major financial institutions, they have graduate tracks. It's just at that point, I think it's very difficult to consider banking or to consider finance, and it can be very competitive. I know that you would have seen some reports with major banks having maybe 1,000 applicants for one particular one place on the graduate scheme. So it can be very competitive, and I feel that is where potentially the problem is. So in order for us to get more women into any profession, I think it starts with the guidance, the schools, the high schools, the prep schools in some cases, which play such an important role. And organizations like yours that have an ability to resonate with young women as they're making those key decisions, even during university. I mean, having that understanding of how I apply for a graduate scheme, what is this industry, what kind of profession within that industry would align with what I want to do next. Even those conversations could be very useful. But again, I think the reality, and there have been a few reports, probably are telling us that those discussions are not happening. They're happening at the top universities, but probably the sort of second, third tier students are not exposed to that knowledge, and thus you don't know what you don't know to some extent.
Yeah.
And then you put it in a box and you're thinking about finance, this kind of very numerate, very kind of high skill, and then it becomes very intimidating, especially for young women and girls.
Definitely. Actually, interestingly, at the start of this year, we hosted a mentorship program, and we had 9 mentors from around the world, and we match made them with obviously some like young women or just women who wanted to kind of get back into their careers. And we had a lot of applicants come in, and we got people to write in, why do you need a mentor? What industry are you looking to get into? And there was an overwhelming amount of women who were looking to get into the financial space, whether that was like accounting or like you said, like venture capital, things like that, like funding. There was like an overwhelming amount of that. And that shocked us a little bit because something we look at is like financial well-being and how we can make these conversations and like this knowledge more accessible to women. And I think that's kind of the key, is like that little nugget, which is how do we make this knowledge actually accessible? Like we can have these conversations, but when it comes to like curriculums and schools and higher education and things like that, how can we open up and show the scope of what a company is. So if you want to go into the finance space, this doesn't just mean one thing. You can do a lot of different things within the industry. And I think that's something that we're really trying to like push forward and kind of like just raise that awareness to young girls, that if to get into tech you don't have to just know programming. That's not how that works. So yeah.
It's a very interesting kind of pathway that we're taking here with our conversation. I think that there are quite a number of different companies within the technology world that actually are trying to address the financial acumen of young people. I think that those are companies that are doing a lot to bring that general knowledge from kind of home economics on the curriculum all the way to kind of neo-banking applications that are now targeting more and more parents and their children in the hope of actually bridging this knowledge that maybe our schools are not doing so well. I do feel that potentially the outreach effort of organizations like yours and many others combined has an ability to influence. Even if you did one student out of 100, it would still be a substantial impact over the next decade or 2 decades. So when we're thinking about programs of this nature, I think the way educational initiatives are funded, they always look at a very large percentage of people converting or going on a particular pathway. I think we should be looking at incremental change so that more and more young people are starting to ask questions and be curious and seek initiatives. And I remember when I was in university, I was involved in a number of European and national programs like Bright Futures, and I think there was another one, Front Runners, placing students in different parts of organizations and getting them to experiment. But even then, what was quite fascinating was that at the country level, there are only a few hundred out of populations of hundreds of thousands, right? So this work will never be done. I think that what we could potentially do a little bit better is impart our knowledge. So what we in different professions do on a day-to-day basis, and thus give more of a glimpse into the working of a particular person in a particular role in a particular organization. And the more you see women and in particular people like yourself in those positions, the more you start to relate to them. And I think that is potentially something that you guys could do and run with next year, a day in the life of many women like myself and many others across different organizations. I think we can be a kind of a gateway into specific types of roles at the right moment in time when you're ready.
That is actually something that we do online at the moment. We do have a feature on day in the life of various different women. It's only been up and running for a month at the moment. So we're going to definitely have more of that in the new year, though. I love that idea.
I would have loved that to have it in school. I'm going to be very transparent. I had absolutely no idea. I was actually working in the investment side, and I was still asking very basic questions about the profession. So hopefully through a lot more education that is delivered in a, I would say, non-pedantic, very relatable way by real people and their real jobs without the airbrush, I think that is when we're going to see more and more thinking, actually, this is something that I would really love to learn more about. And it's that curiosity that transforms into maybe a professional pathway. Rather than get into a profession, figure out what it was all about. And that is my experience qualifying as a solicitor. It's just the realization that I studied 6 years for something that I really wouldn't have enjoyed if I only had the guidance. I'm a very poor example, extreme example of how to waste time. But I think that, can you imagine how many people actually go into finance, never mind women or men, and they realize actually that's not for me. I never realized that I would have to do that every day.
Yeah.
And it would be really sad after so many years of university and so much debt, which so many of us accumulate along those years, to realize actually I don't want to do that. I would rather, I think that the government and many organizations should be investing more in outreach programs, because you get the right people in your organization because they really understand why they want to be there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think that was one of the main reasons why I actually wanted to launch that feature as well, because when I was talking to various different women through the magazine and online features, everything, there were so many people I'd see their job title and be like, I don't actually know what you would do. So I thought, well, if I was like that, then everybody else would be like that. So I think, yeah, it's really great to hear that you've actually got the same kind of outlook on that as well.
Job titles can be very deceiving. It's different organizations, actually similar financial institutions can have different names for the same role, which make it so much more complicated. So a vice president in a major bank means someone that is kind of midpoint, not leadership. But a venture, a vice president in a small fund can mean a very serious role that is in part of the leadership. And vice president in a normal corporate, non-finance related, can actually mean kind of the sort of second tier of leadership just under the executives. So I think depending on the institutions and the sector, even a very simple job title like that can be very, very confusing. So if you're thinking about a particular pathway, job titles are really a trap that you could quite easily find yourself more confused. I guess that this is why we need initiatives like you have, because there's just so much complexity in just think about any very small fund. You probably have a finance person as a financial director or chief financial officer. Then you have an operational director. You have marketing. You have sales. You have credit underwriting. You have boards for different reasons, and that is just an operation with like 20 people. Now you multiply that much larger organizations by 20, 30 different parts of the bank or the conglomerate, and you end up being very confused. As a young person, it's really overwhelming to the point that it's repellent. I don't know how you felt when you were like 17, 18 or 16. I know my span of attention was very low. I was very fortunate that I had very pushy parents that didn't allow me to go into more artistic endeavors that probably would have rendered me at least 2-3 times bankrupt. I had the sort of guidance from my parents and potentially sitting on top of my shoulder, which is not a great way to parent, by the way, to the audience. But I was channeled into a profession that they thought was enabling me to achieve my potential. The fact that I taken a detour, I'm still using the skills today. I'm not gonna say anything bad about going a law, qualifying as a lawyer or a solicitor or whatever profession in law. It's very useful life skills to be able to know and to navigate contracts, and to be able to understand the complexity that might not be there on the page. I think that is something that nobody can take away. But from my perspective, we still need to work very hard in creating the right opportunities and the right insight.
Definitely. And I just want to bring it back to, so we've got some people commenting. So Carlotta said, Very interesting conversation, and so true about the point that coding and programming isn't the only way to get into tech. There's so many more non-tech roles. We've also got Alison, who said, it's incredible to hear you speak. We have to give students a chance to explore different career paths before they get themselves in thousands of dollars of debt. Often for a career they might not even like. So, I mean, there's something to brainstorm and think about, is how can we kind of like trial run loads of different careers? How can we kind of start the conversation early? One thing that I was like, when I was before starting university, so unaware what all these job titles meant. Like when it came to like CMO, CISO, CDO, and I'm like, I don't even know what these mean. I know they're higher up and they're in a leadership team. I'm still learning like new ones that come up today. And that's like super daunting. And it's like, is that what I should be achieving to be? Or what is a normal job title level for me to go into? Is it executive? Is it manager? Like, it's very much an ambiguous and scary space. So I want to kind of just round up the conversation and just ask you one final question of
Sure.
what do you think the future kind of looks like for this space? Do you see a positive change? Do you see progression in these conversations and kind of getting more women into these male-dominated industries?
That's a very, very tough question, Emily. I think that there are organizations that have taken upon themselves, like Diversity VC and a few others, to highlight how important women are across all levels of an organization, from leadership to the most junior roles, all the way down to graduate schemes. So people that are for the first time getting a job, any type of job after finishing university. I think that the more we discuss and the more we shed light on this topic, the more we're going to get people to be aware at any level of an organization you find yourself, when you're thinking about recruitment and when you're thinking about who to bring in, paying a little bit of attention to diversity and not necessarily rushing to hire someone that is exactly like you. Because I think that this is where we're stumbling into that sort of involuntary bias. And I think that we all have it. It's there from day one. And the more we discuss, the more we become aware, and the more we know how to create fairer ways and more outreach programs. And we're really thinking not just short-termist, I need this role filled in the next 3 months, but what can I do to fill in this role now? And what can I do to put a program for the next 3, 4, 5 roles that I'm going to create, and how I'm going to attract the best talent and be fair in my process. Because companies really do benefit from diversity. I think this is what we forget, that any company that has a very good balance actually is more profitable. And that is what research has shown us for at least 3 decades. And, the audience can go and look at McKinsey. They've done amazing studies on women on boards. So I think it's just so important to pay attention to diversity and to bias as we progress from any level of your career or profession to the highest of levels. We all carry a responsibility. It's not just the top. It's often this kind of misconception that is the board of directors or the leadership. It often happens at the across the whole company. If people don't care about diversity, it doesn't matter what an executive says. If people within the organization say, actually, let's do the right thing, let's go and speak with a school and with a high school and at a university, then that organization is gonna attract a lot more diverse skills, and the leadership is gonna adapt. So people forget that actually it's not all about leadership. And I'm glad that most of the movements in our ecosystem came from amazing individuals doing in some cases very junior roles, and getting the people in the right funds and the right roles to commit to a mission of shedding light and providing transparency. And I think that is encouraging. But I do feel it is going to be a long way until we see programs like yours maybe coming into schools and many more girls picking the right pathway and changing gradually. But I remain optimistic. I think that all of these discussions have an ultimate positive goal, and it can't harm anyone.
Yes, definitely. And I think it's kind of, it takes one thing to inspire you. It can take one webinar or someone coming into school and giving a talk that can inspire you to do something different. So I think that's a really awesome note to kind of end the conversation on. That's kind of our roundtable today, our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we could have probably spoken about this for like another hour. But I mean, there's many more days in the week for that. So a huge thank you, Flavia, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm going to wrap up now and talk about
Thank you for having me.
See you later. Thank you.
Thanks, Flavia. Bye.
I'm just going to wrap up now and talk about the poll results that we've had before we keep anyone waiting. So the poll that was sent out last week was, what is the biggest obstacle women face when wanting to progress their careers in male-dominated industries, as you can see on the bar below. So we had sexism or discrimination for A, B, lack of flexible support, C, lack of opportunities, and D, gender pay gap. We actually got some really great responses on this, and still the one in the lead with 34% is B, lack of flexible support. So if you're looking to make a difference to the women in your organisation, consider how you're supporting their working hours, consider their role they have in their family, whether they are a parent and a mother. Just, maybe start the conversation with some employees that you have and see how you can kind of outreach and support them in any way you can. I think that's hopefully a lesson that we can learn from today's conversation, and so many more. Obviously, Flavia gave us so many great insights that I hope and I know have been very beneficial to you all. So that is kind of a wrap for today. I have changed positions because my laptop was going to die, but we're here. Thank you so much for joining us. This will be available on demand, and we look to host a webinar every month. So please tune in then. And that's all. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lucy. And thank you for everyone who engaged. This has been a lovely conversation. So until next time.
Thanks, Emily.
Bye.
Bye.